Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. Today's video, we are talking all about your wedding ceremony, whether this is a non-denominational or religious ceremony. These are my tips on how to have a flawless ceremony. These are some of my best tips on just your ceremony as a whole and how to have the best wedding ceremony possible. Number one, this might feel kind of obvious, but have a rehearsal. There is a reason that you have what's called a rehearsal dinner the night before your wedding. This typically follows your wedding rehearsal. Don't ever skip your rehearsal. And if you have the means to be able to do this at your actual wedding venue where your wedding ceremony will take place, I highly recommend taking advantage of this opportunity to have everyone on site where the wedding ceremony is actually going to happen. Not only will this just kind of give everyone spatially a good idea of where they're going to be, the order you're walking down the aisle in, and being able to just kind of go through the motions is going to make everyone more comfortable. And a lot of the emphasis on the rehearsal is placed on kind of going through the motions and the walking orders and the standing orders and everything. But it's also great for you as a couple to kind of know what to expect and be able to practice a little bit with your officiant too. And you don't need the officiant to go through everything that they're going to say at your wedding ceremony, but it's good to kind of bullet point the order of events so that you guys know what to expect, go through the motions of walking down the aisle, going through the motions of making sure that you have somebody there to take your bouquet and adjust your dress and your train, and making sure that you know who's going to have the rings and what time that person is going to bring them to the officiant when you exchange your rings. Do you do your vows first or your rings first? Being able to just kind of know what to expect for your wedding ceremony is going to make everyone feel a lot more at ease and increase the likelihood that your wedding ceremony will go flawlessly. Tip number two, print actual physical hard copies of everything that will be needed for your wedding ceremony. So if your officiant plans to read off of an iPad or off of a cell phone, which I highly recommend he doesn't read off of a cell phone, it's always a good idea to have printed something in like a binder or a folder for the officiant. But I have seen a lot use an iPad, and a lot of times they can look like kind of a mini folder. So looks wise, iPad's fine, but make sure that if they are using some kind of electronic, that you do have a print hard copy as well in case something were to go wrong with the technology. This also goes for any readings that are going to take place during your wedding and your vows. So if you have special little vow books that you plan on using to read your vows, that's great, but it's also a really good idea to type up your vows and just have an extra copy in case something happens to your vow book or something gets wet or smeared on it and you can't read what you wrote, just to have an extra copy as backup with the officiant in whatever folder they have. Number three, mark off the first row or two wherever you plan on having immediate family sit. Most of the time, it's pretty common that random guests aren't going to just come in and sit in the very first row. However, I have seen it happen, so better safe than sorry, and have some way to denote whoever is going to be sitting in the front row and however many chairs you need. Maybe it's the first two rows on either side for the immediate family. A lot of times these are individuals that are participating in the processional, so they're walking down the aisle, so they will not be seated, so it will seem like those chairs are empty at the start of your ceremony. So make sure you have some kind of signage, ribbons, something that are indicating that those chairs are actually taken. Number four, if you have any pedals or a runner down your aisle and you don't want guests walking through the aisle, highly recommend having something to kind of block off the back of your row. So whether that is a tie that goes across, a ribbon of some sort, so that guests can't use the aisle space to get to and from their seats. Everyone will fill in from kind of the outside of the aisles and fill into the center aisle chairs. That way you can kind of keep that center however you are having it decorated, but like I said, whether with a runner or with pedals, that can stay picture perfect before everyone else walks down the aisle that is part of the processional, and then just make sure that you have somebody that can go and remove whatever is blocking the aisle before the processional actually begins. Next, if you are planning on having an unplugged ceremony, regardless of any signage you have at your ceremony site, you definitely want to have your officiant make some kind of announcement to explain this or just to remind guests. A lot of times with just signs alone, guests see it and they kind of just ignore it. So make sure that you are having your officiant say something for the guests that are ignoring the signs or guests that didn't see the signs. That way you can let them know to put their phones away, iPads away, cameras, whatever they have, so that they aren't ruining any of the professional photographs that you're going to get. And it's best for them to do this at the start of the ceremony start time, before the actual processional happens. That way everyone is already seated, they can kind of get their attention, but it's not deterring from the music or the processional or the attention from anything else that's happening. Speaking of officiant, my next tip, and you've probably seen this before, is to have your officiant move out of the way before your first kiss. So after you've exchanged vows, after you've exchanged your rings, you're going to kiss as husband and wife or as a married couple for the very first time. In this moment, after he is giving the orders to, you may now kiss your bride, or whatever those words are going to be at your wedding, right after delivering these instructions, make sure that he or she is moving out of the way so that there is not this just head in the background of all of your first kiss photos. Next tip, I should have mentioned this when we were discussing about rehearsals, but if you are doing rehearsal in your actual space where the wedding ceremony will be taking place, highly recommend doing this with whatever music you're going to be walking down the aisle with. This will give you a sense of timing and knowing if you need an additional song, or where you need to loop it, or if it's going to be too long, if there's a certain part you want to make sure the song that you want is going to be played during the processional. Make sure that everything works music-wise. It doesn't have to be perfect down to the last note, and make sure that the timing is exactly spot on. Pretty much any DJ will loop the song if needed, but it's just good to know what to expect so that you can relay that to your DJ, or your wedding coordinator can relay that to the DJ, so they know what to expect and how many people there will be walking down, and roughly how long that's going to take. If you have live performance and live music for your processional, this is where it's going to be a little bit more specific and a great idea to time how long things are taking during the rehearsal, so that you can relay that message to your musicians, as it's a little bit more difficult to kind of just loop the music or go with the flow when it's live. Next is be familiar with where the center is when you are practicing. Your officiant ideally will stand in the center of your whole kind of setup for the ceremony. This way all of your pictures will be nice and centered, and wherever guests are looking, everything is going to be centered. So make sure that when you're practicing, you're having this discussion of, okay, this is center, this is exactly where you're going to stand, because your wedding officiant will kind of be the first one standing up there and initiate where everyone else is going to stand. So if they are not center, then you two will likely not be centered. So you want to make sure that between the three of you, you are standing, if you have an altar, that you're standing directly in the center of it, so that all your pictures are nice and centered. Make sure that your DJ, or if you have musicians there, that they know what the last words are that are going to be spoken by your officiant before you guys are recessing back down the aisle. This will be their cue to play the recessional music, which is what will play when you walk back down the aisle after you've already been married. So is it right after the kiss and then he doesn't say anything else? Is it right after the kiss and then they announce you as husband and wife? Is there some other kind of blessing or prayer or announcement that's going to take place after the kiss that they have to wait for? Make sure that they are aware of whatever the last words spoken by the officiant are going to be, as that will be their cue for the recessional music. My next tip, if you are having animals involved in your ceremony at all, so if you have your dog walking down the aisle or any other animal involved, make sure that you have a designated person that is kind of the animal handler. So whether that is whoever is walking down the aisle with them, great, obviously you need somebody to do that as well, but you also want to think about who's going to be kind of the handler once they already get down the aisle. So maybe whoever's walking them isn't who's going to be holding onto them for the duration of the ceremony. Are they going to walk down the aisle and then somebody's going to take them and sit down in the ceremony? Is someone going to take them and kind of move to the back so they aren't distracting? Whatever that's going to be, make sure you have a plan and you have a designated person that will kind of do the handoff and be in control of this animal once they walk down the aisle. This also goes for children. If you are having small children like flower girls, ring bearers in your ceremony, make sure that you have somebody that's kind of in charge of them and also kind of wrangle them. It might be helpful to have a designated person that's going to stand at the end of the aisle to kind of assist them or coax them down the aisle or bribe them or whatever you need to do to get the little ones down the aisle. Speaking of, if you do have little ones that are participating in your ceremony, do everything that you can to have them available at the rehearsal. I know this can be really difficult, and it may not feel as big of a deal to them if it's at a rehearsal when a bunch of people aren't looking at them. A lot of times their reaction will change in that environment on the actual wedding day, but at least they will know what to expect, and it gets them a little bit more comfortable with the process if they are able to be present at the wedding ceremony and kind of see everyone's faces before the actual wedding ceremony itself. One last tip regarding kids in the ceremony: don't force them to do anything. Sometimes it will go great and they're going to do exactly what they're supposed to do and walk down the aisle with no issues. A lot of times there might be some tears, some screaming, some crying. Honestly, if you kind of just let them free for all however they get down the aisle, it's going to be cute no matter what. It's going to make good pictures, whether they're adorable or they're hilarious pictures. It's going to elicit some kind of emotion and reaction, and just kind of let them get down the aisle. If it's taking a really long time, if they turn around and run away, don't force them back down the aisle. Just kind of call it a wash, move them out of the way, make sure they aren't in the aisle in the way of anyone else that's walking down, and just kind of move on. And my last note relating to children: if you have a small ring bearer, typically under the age of like 7 is kind of my cutoff, do not let them carry the actual rings. I have seen this go horribly wrong, from a small child carrying the rings down the aisle and ended up losing them prior to walking down the aisle. And this is, as you can imagine, slightly disastrous. So highly recommend, if you have a child being a ring bearer, that they have a pillow or whatever is going to be carrying the rings, and just have fake rings or have it be empty, have some kind of prop, and not give them the actual real rings that you plan to exchange. Another quick little tip: make sure that the officiant remembers to tell everyone to be seated. So when the bride walks down the aisle, it is customary for everyone to stand. Most of the time people will do this unprompted. It's a good idea to maybe assign like the parents, the people that are in the first couple of rows, to initiate this standing, and everyone will kind of follow. A lot of times the officiant will do just what I'm doing and kind of use their hands to motion like everyone rise. They don't have to necessarily verbally say it. But make sure that the officiant does verbally tell everyone to sit down once you have reached the end of the aisle. Next, decide who is going to be going first when it comes to vows prior to your wedding ceremony. It's just gonna run a lot smoother if you already know who's going first, and you don't have that weird like, oh, I don't know, should I go? Do you want to go? I don't care. You guys had that discussion previously, or if you don't know and you don't care, I have seen some couples do like a cute little rock, paper, scissors thing at the beginning, and that can be really cute because it's a good little photo op, makes your guests have a little chuckle if you don't have a preference on who goes first. But have some kind of plan on who's going to be giving their vows first, that's already established and taken care of prior to your actual ceremony. Speaking of vows, make sure you have a microphone. Regardless of the size of wedding you have or the size of your location, it's a great idea to have a microphone regardless, especially if it's outdoors. There can be a lot of elements that can factor into how well you can hear somebody. So even if you think that it's going to be pretty quiet in your surrounding areas, there's not that many guests, you don't have to project that far, always recommend having some kind of microphone. I kind of mentioned this before, but make sure that you have somebody there to hand off your bouquet if you are the bride. So typically this will be a maid of honor if you have a bridal party standing up with you. However, we have seen more recently couples opting out of bridal parties altogether. So if you don't plan on having a maid of honor or any bridesmaids with you, you want to make sure that you have somebody that is close by that you have already talked to previously that can be in charge of taking your bouquet once you get up there, because you want to make sure that your hands are free and that you're not holding your bouquet for the duration of your ceremony. This also goes for your dress, and if you need anything fluffed out and your train laid nicely so that it looks good in all of your photos, this will be the same person. They will lay out and fluff your train in your dress and then take your bouquet. On this note, make sure that you get your bouquet back from that person before walking back down the aisle. So it's a really good idea to practice this during your rehearsal as well, so that you can practice kind of going through those motions and knowing when to hand it off and when to get it back prior to walking back down the aisle. Okay, now we are reaching the end of the ceremony. Make sure that you have a conversation with your photographer about what you plan to do walking back down the aisle. So a lot of times photographers will have you pause at the end of the aisle for photos or pause in the middle of the aisle for photos. So make sure you know what to expect here, whether that is a pause in the middle, you guys are pausing and, cheering, exciting, throwing your veil in the air, or pausing and kissing, pausing and dipping, whatever that is. Have that kind of planned ahead of time so that you can go right into that and get those great photos. Finally, after you are announced husband and wife or partners or whatever you are being deemed at the end of your wedding ceremony, don't just run back down the aisle. Make sure that you are taking a second to get your bouquet back, turn around, hold hands, however you're going to embrace, and face all of your guests that have just been there to witness this. Not only is this a great opportunity to get a good picture, but it also kind of lets everyone soak in what they just witnessed and be able to cheer and recognize the union that you guys just made together. It's so easy to talk about all of the decor and the reception side of weddings because there's so much that goes into that, but we can't forget the importance of the wedding ceremony itself, and hopefully these tips will help you achieve a flawless ceremony for your wedding. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.